What we're seeing more and more in our world is the rise of case-based interviews. When I talk about our world, I'm talking about marketing executive search. So if you're a senior level marketing person or a senior level product marketing person, e-commerce, innovation, digital marketing, this video is to help you get through and get prepared for case-based interviews. We see case-based interviews a lot in the world of management consulting, and they're done a little differently as you get more senior in the organization. So we're going to focus on what executives need to know about case-based interviews. So as you get more senior in your career and you're executive and you're going in for a senior position, there's different types of case-based interviews or fewer types of case-based interviews than you might have seen as a management consultant. There's generally three types that are used within executive search and recruiting for executives. One is the simple business question. And the thing that can be tricky and throw people off about this case is the question is very simple and very vague, and the answer is expected to be very detailed. So a simple business question could be, shall we acquire that business? Should we go into Latin America? Our business in this area is losing money. What do we need to do to fix it? Incredibly vague questions, and they're expecting very detailed answers. The next type of case-based interview question that you might get is a very specific business question. A very specific business question could be, our business unit is selling $100 million a year. The average sales rep sells $2 million. We want to grow to $200 million. And the profit margin is 35%. How many salespeople can we afford to hire without borrowing money? And at that point in time, how long will it take us to grow to $200 million? That would be a much more specific type of case-based interview question. And the third type is presentation style. And the presentation style can be either very vague or very specific. But if you get asked to present and you get an hour and a half worth of time, either to one person or to a team of people, and are sent a very vague or very specific question, then you are now in a case-based presentation. As we're talking about the very specific types of case-based interviews you may get, and we talked about the more vague question versus the much more specific question. The specific question is typically going to be about the business you're interviewing in. So you're going to interview with company X, and they're going to say, this is a problem we have in our North American division, or this is a problem we're having in marketing. And they're going to share with you some pain points, and from that point, they're going to ask you specifically to be able to come up with a solution. Ultimately, the more you know their business, the easier that's going to be for you. So taking the time to do research on who they are, what they do, and really knowing them before you walk in the door is critically important. So as you're doing your case-based interview, it's important to remember that they're looking for two different things. One is they're looking to make sure that you have a high IQ, which is what you'd probably expect. They're also testing your EQ and your emotional maturity and how you react in a difficult situation. So how you handle the case is just as important as what you say about the case. So as you're looking at this case, and it really doesn't matter which case we talked about, be it the general question, the more specific question, or either one in the presentation style, there's steps in the process to being successful. And the first step is break down the question into smaller subsets so that you can tackle each subset and help them understand how you're thinking through the problem. Now that you've broken down it into smaller pieces and it's much more manageable, much more bite-sized, you need to walk them through how you solve each one of those pieces, right? So each area that you've broken it down to is now a separate business problem. How am I going to tackle that, and how am I going to solve it? Now the next part, and this is really important to the process, right, is doing the math of the problem, right? You're being asked about a business case, you're being asked about something that has to do with their business, and they want to understand that you can logically put numbers behind it, because at the end, you're going to have to validate your hypothesis with these numbers. So it's very important that as you're deconstructing the problem, breaking down it into subsets, that you understand and put math and numbers into it. We talk about the math and the component of that as it relates to the case-based interviewing, right? Depending on how much information you've been given and whether you got a vague question or a very specific question, will determine how you go through that process, right? You may be doing very specific math, or more often than not, it may just be estimated math, right? And you may just be estimating how much things are going to be in cost to get to your hypothesis and your conclusion. Either one is fine and either one is acceptable as long as you can back it up with your logic. Now that you've got some analytics and math behind the problem, you're going to go back and define in specific terms what the problem is, right? Because ultimately you've been given a case that's very vague or maybe somewhat specific. And you're going to have to define the specific problem that you're solving for in the end. Because if you don't define the problem you're solving for, it's hard for them to fully understand the process you went through and how your mind works. So they're giving you a general problem. They want to understand how you think through it, and you're going to come to a conclusion at the end. But before you get there, you're going to define very specifically the problem as you see it. Once you have defined the problem and you have the math that backs that problem up, the data that backs it up, you're going to then go through a process of communicating the solution to the individual or the group, whoever you're presenting to. Now, we talked before about this being both an IQ and an EQ test. So it's when you communicate back your solution that it's very important to do it in a senior executive, CEO friendly type tone, right? You're communicating to senior executives, you're providing business counsel and a solution, and you're doing so at an executive level. You're not communicating to a more junior level person. And it's important as you're trying to show that you have the emotional maturity to be in this role. So now that you understand a little bit more about what a case-based interview is, it's important to know how to prepare. So I'm going to go with the assumption that you've been through the other great videos on our site around phone interviews and how to prepare for successful interview experience, and that this is somewhat after that fact. If not, please go back and review those. Ultimately, the case-based interview is only going to get done well if you've practiced it. So go out and find some samples, find some examples, and take the time to go through and force yourself to do some case-based interviews. Go ahead and get someone that's a friend of yours to give you the interview and give you some feedback, and the closer they know your space and your business, the better. There are certain industries that use case-based interviews more than others, and there are certain executives based on their background that are more likely to use case-based interviews. So the question becomes, how do you know if you're walking into a case-based interview? And as you look up people's profiles and you understand their background, if they were ever in management consulting, be it a Bain, BCG, McKinsey, they're likely to do a case-based interview because that's the way they came up as a consultant. If you're going into financial services organization, a technology company, those organizations also much more often than not do case-based interviews, and it's a time to be prepared for them. And the other time you're going to get case-based interviews is typically if the interviewer comes from a high-level B school, so a Harvard, an Emory, a Michigan, a UVA, any of your top 25 B schools would have sent those people through case-based interviews as part of their learning. As a result of these case-based interviews, what we find is that the decisions come very quickly, right? You've either gone in and impressed them and shown them that you can handle critical thinking skills, you understand how business processes work, you're able to present and communicate in a way that other executives find engaging, and you basically rocked the interview out and they want to hire you. Or not so much, and it just didn't work out. So we find that based on these types of interviews, the decisions come very quickly, which means being prepared for them is very important.